So in this video, I would like to cover the different types of models which we're going to learn in this class, really tie the past couple sets of videos into looking forward at the next 10 weeks and think about not only the importance of models, but specifically which models we are going to learn, and also tie them to a more hierarchical view of economics and think about the different classifications of models and the different branches of economics so that you can better organize how these models are related to each other. So I think that there are several benefits to this, this video. And if we remember the rational rule in the previous videos, we know that we want it to be worth your time to watch this video and to continue watching each video, that the benefits are going to outweigh the costs. That you're going to make that decision efficiently by whether or not to watch one more video or not. So I think that it's rational to watch this video for several reasons, the first of which being that if you were going to major in economics or business, if you were going to tell people that you studied economics in college, which you are doing by taking this class, then it's going to help for you to be conversational about all branches of economics, for you to tell people that you know the difference between environmental economics and macroeconomics, between behavioral economics and labor economics, and to know how they can be related. It's also, I think, an important lecture because if you were thinking about majoring in economics, then this video will be an introduction to the different branches, and you can decide which branch, which type of economics is of most interest to you, and you can learn more about how that branch tries to improve the world, how you can use your knowledge and interest to make the world a better place for everyone. It's also important for you to succeed in this class because this video will help once again motivate your learning and tie the different models together so that once again it'll seem not like memorizing random facts, but learning a broader discipline and realizing how it's all interconnected. So perhaps the most well-known categorization of different branches of economics is between microeconomics and macroeconomics. And these are really the two main branches, but it's better to think of them as being complementary perspectives rather than competing fields. That we think that these two perspectives can be thought of as a big picture and a little picture of aiming to better understand the fundamental question of scarcity. And so we need to understand the micro to understand the macro. And we think of these as being micro foundations of macroeconomics. So even though it is helpful to think of them as being complementary perspectives, we could better understand each of these perspectives by breaking down that one definition of economics in general into separate definitions of microeconomics and macroeconomics, and to see how they're related to that fundamental question of scarcity. And so for microeconomics, that sub-definition would be the study of how budget-constrained, utility-maximizing individuals respond to incentives. And there are some vocabulary words here. Budget-constrained just means that we are unable to afford, unable to accrue everything that we want. Utility-maximizing just means that we are rational, that we are seeking happiness, and that we're trying to maximize our happiness subject to our constraints, subject to scarcity and our limited resources. Individuals, really by this I just mean agents, that we're thinking about small parties, whether that's households, whether that is individual people, and incentives are signals or messages that are related to scarcity, such as prices. For macroeconomics, the textbook definition is the study of how societies allocate scarce resources. And so societies here, these are agglomerations. They are composites of economic agents. We're adding together the behavior of individuals to think of how collectively we make decisions and allocate how we distribute scarce resources such as jobs, such as national income. But I think that kind of loses the point of what macroeconomics, which is all about. And for that reason, I'm providing my own translation of this, which is, I think that macroeconomics is all about how societies maximize total happiness, how they ensure that we are as happy as we can be in our total, and how that happiness is distributed. And so with that in mind, I'd like to, I guess, break down that a little bit further and think about how that's related to some philosophical concepts. So if we want to think about how societies maximize total happiness, this is going to depend on how we define what happiness is and how happiness can be quantified. If we're thinking about something that's being maximized, then we must be able to measure it. And if we want to measure happiness, we need to think about how we can add the happiness of Will to the happiness of Professor Gonzalez. And in market-based economies, in capitalist economies, and in general, more free market economies at large, total happiness, adding it up for everybody, is just a simple utilitarianism form, meaning that we are adding the happiness of each individual experiences to form some aggregate form of happiness. And so then it becomes an important question of how do we know how happy individuals really are? Due to the rational rule, which we learned in the previous videos, we can assume that the more you buy, the happier you are. So obviously there are problems with that approach, and in a couple of weeks we're going to just chip away and hammer away at that assumption that the happier you are is due to the more you buy. But when we think about rational behavior, if you are only buying something because you benefit from it, then we can measure that benefit by thinking about how much you are able to buy and how much you decide to buy, because every time that dollar amount leaves your hand, you are choosing to do that, and you are doing so because it will make you happier. And so with that in mind, we can then come up with measures of happiness for individuals and for societies at large. And if we want to maximize then the total spending and consumption in society, if we want to maximize happiness and we measure happiness by spending, and we want to maximize spending, then we also need to think about the impact of prices and the real value of what you're buying versus the impact which higher prices may have. Because obviously you're not better off if you have to pay $20 for a hamburger than $5 for a hamburger, even though you are spending more. And so happiness is going to be maximized when prices are stable and when it's distributed more evenly throughout society, when everyone has the means to buy and spend, and that isn't only in the hands of Jeff Bezos. So macroeconomics is then concerned with maximizing happiness by increasing the total spending power in the economy through economic growth, which we measure with gross domestic product, by stabilizing prices, by managing inflation, and by minimizing joblessness, by working towards full employment, by minimizing unemployment. And so these are going to be our three primary measures of macroeconomic success, of achieving the most happiness for our society while balancing the needs of the individuals in society. We're going to return to these after our first exam. So these are macroeconomic concepts. We're going to start off by studying the microeconomic foundations of macroeconomics, but rest assured we will return to these and study them in depth. However, before we do that, it's really going to be helpful if we understand the micro foundations. if we understand the behavior of individuals which form the greater society. And so this is where it's really helpful to think about both the microeconomics and macroeconomics as being a little picture and a big picture, and needing to understand the little picture to understand the big picture. And there are similarities here for how we do this in other sciences, for how we do it in physics, for how we use the big picture and the little picture in biology. And so if we think about instead of being the manager of an economy, we are the manager of an ecosystem, then we want to think about what the goals of managing an ecosystem would be. So let's take this lake ecosystem as an example. What would your goals be if you were charged with maintaining this ecosystem? We could think that maybe high biodiversity would be good. We want to be able to catch different kinds of fish. We want to be able to see different kinds of birds. We would like maybe clear water. It's good for swimming. Maybe we would want more nutritious water that may be murkier, that may have more algae growing, because that's representative of the food which would provide for greater biodiversity. Maybe we want better fishing conditions. And so to understand those goals, to understand how we could achieve those goals, we need to understand the individual relationships within that ecosystem. We need to understand the food web. Do having too many catfish impact the amount of bass that we have, for example? And we would need to understand the diets of particular fish. We would need to understand the reproduction of algae. And so with that in mind, we need to understand the biology of individual species to achieve the goals of managing the whole ecosystem. When we then think about the macroeconomy at whole, when we think about achieving happiness, the maximum amount of happiness for all members of society, we then need to think about the individual relationships and the behavior of individual economic agents as constituting the relationships which create the macroeconomy. And so if we think of a few goals related to the distribution of resources in a society, then we can think that whatever those goals are, we need to know how individuals and companies make decisions in order to understand how to implement the economy-wide goals. And that's why I think it's important to know both macroeconomics and microeconomics, regardless of which of these you are more interested in.